أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد. We are finishing the chapter on the life of this world. Inshallah, I hope to finish it today, about the life of this dunya. And this is one of the last chapters we have in this book, and inshallah, we'll be done with the book. So a lot of times, and in the past halaqat, Assalamu alaikum, we talked a lot about the illusion of the life of this world and how people get caught up in the life of this world, and how attachments in this life end up becoming a distraction for people. Come on this side so you can see. End up becoming a distraction for people, which keep them from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this life for a lot of people ends up being a barrier between them and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why does it become a barrier? Because it becomes a distraction. People start to love this life more than the next life. Just the same way that whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you a gift. Now, I gave this example last time. When I give a gift to someone, so suppose I was the one who gave Zamzam that red purse, and that was my gift to Zamzam. When I gave her that purse, what's the purpose of giving her that purse? To show her that I love her, and also to make her and me closer together. The purpose of the gift is to actually make the recipient and the giver closer together. The purpose is not for Zamzam to fall in love with the person and throw me away. And yet when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us gifts, He gives us our health, He gives us money, He gives us our children, He gives us our husbands, He gives us our wives, He gives us anything that He gives us of gifts in this life. We take the gift, we fall in love with the gift, and we throw Him away. Not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is high above any analogy. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be thrown away. But what we do is we put Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala aside in our own lives. Meaning we turn our backs on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Does this hurt Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Does this harm Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? No, absolutely not. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not love this. It does not please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't hurt Him in the way that we might be able to hurt a human being if we were to actually put them aside. So that's something to make clear. But the point here is that when Allah gives us gifts in this life, we miss the point. We miss the point of the gift. The point of the gift is to make us love the giver more. The point of the gift is to bring us closer to the giver. But instead we take the gift and we love the gift more than the giver. That's where we make the mistake. And by the way, that is also when the gift itself becomes a form of a source of torment for us. When you take, if you know, in this case, if we take the gifts of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and we love those gifts more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we love our money more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we love status more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we love our children more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or our spouses more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, those very things will become the source of our greatest pain. Those very things will become the source of torment for us in this life before the next. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran says and warns the believers, warns us not to call on anyone else, any other object. Do not call on any other ilah or object of worship other than Him. And He warns us that if you do that, you will be among the tormented. Mu'adhabeen, those who are tortured or tormented. The surface meaning of this ayah, which is true, is that if anybody commits shirk, they're going to be among the tormented in the hereafter, right? We know this. If you're praying to a statue, if you commit shirk, you're going to be among unless you repent, right? So this is true. But there's another layer of meaning that we can understand from this ayah. Anytime you call on another in this life, or love another thing other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or you love something as you should only love Allah, or you seek refuge in something where you should only seek refuge in Allah, that very object of attachment becomes a source of torment for you. You know how the ayah says that do not call, when it's saying do not call on other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, any ilah other than Allah, or you will be among the tortured, among the tormented. My point is that torture and that torment is not just, is not just restricted to the hereafter. It's not. It will begin in this life. Any time that you have an attachment to something as you should only have to Allah, you won't live a happy life in this life before the next. You won't live at peace. You'll be like that person we mentioned last week who's kind of like a drug addict. 1 minute they're high, the next minute they're crashing, right? Because they're addicted or attached or dependent. They're dependent upon something which comes and goes, which goes up and down, which is not stable, and something weak. So if you are dependent on a drug, or you're dependent on your money, or you're dependent on the people in your life, you become weak. Because you're depending on something weak. Do you guys understand? If your handhold is weak, you're weak. If you're standing on something that can break at any time, you become unstable and weak. You guys understand my point? So that's what happens when you begin to love or depend on the gift instead of the giver. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us money, for example, a lot of times what people do is they'll actually depend on the money instead of the provider. They'll depend on the provision instead of the provider. Let me give you an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given you money, and as long as you have thousands of dollars in your bank account, you feel secure, right? But as soon as that money goes down, now you feel insecure, as if it's the money that's making you secure or insecure. You see? When it isn't. It never was the money that was making you secure or insecure. It was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Similarly, when somebody has money, say they have a good job, and then all of a sudden their boss is telling them that you have to do something haram. You have to say, for example, you have a business and you want to make a higher profit margin, so you basically say, okay, well, if I sell alcohol, then I'm going to make more money. A lot of restaurants, they get a lot of their money from alcoholic beverages. So this is where they get a lot of their money. So you now are in a position where you have a business and you want to do better in your business, so you have this question of selling alcohol or not selling alcohol. Or you have like a gas station, or you have whatever it is where you have to, have these choices. Well, the one who thinks that the provision is coming from their job, that the provision is coming from their boss, will in fact maybe just go ahead and do it. And that's a problem in the Tawheed, because the idea is that the provision was coming from their job, as if the money was coming from the business itself, as if the money was coming from the boss himself, when in fact that's an illusion. Because where does the money come from? Ar-Razzaq. Where does the provision come from? Ar-Razzaq, the provider. So it's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the beginning. Where does security come from? It's not from having the money. It's from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or maybe you feel insecure, so you get a security system around your house. These are just examples. You get a security system around your house, and so long as the security system is working, you feel secure. The moment the security system stops working, or maybe something is damaged in it, it doesn't work anymore, all of a sudden you don't feel secure anymore. Where actually are you putting your dependence? In the security system rather than in Allah, where the entire time it was Allah who was protecting your house, not the security system. Do you see how these are examples of how we have a deficiency in our tawheed. We think that, when it comes to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, tawakkul, we have a hard time when things don't work out the way we want. When we think something needs to work a certain way, we think, okay, we want to marry a certain person, or we want to get into a certain college, or we want to get a certain job. We want our kids to get a certain job. We want our kids to do things a certain way or marry a certain person, and it doesn't work out, say. We have a very hard time letting go. And that's because we don't have enough, again, a deficiency in our tawheed. We don't have enough trust that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And it may be that sometimes we love things and they're not good for us. And sometimes we hate things and they are good for us. So this is how we become distracted by the things in dunya. We become deceived by them, and we start to shift our focus from the actual, you see something beautiful in dunya, and you say, like, you start to, just admire the beauty in that thing. Even something like, the ocean. You could sit and look at the ocean and just lose yourself in the ocean. How beautiful is the ocean? But wouldn't you have missed the point? Because the ocean is just a reflection. And any beauty that's in the creation is just a reflection of the beauty of the Creator. So this is how we have to train ourselves. This is what we do. A lot of times, most people, they get deceived by these things in dunya. They're not able to see behind them. When you see money, you're not able to see the one who gave you the money. When you see beauty, you're not able to see the source of the beauty. You're not able to really look behind these things and through these things. Even when you're given hardship, it's very difficult for people to look through the hardship and see what's behind it. Because in every single thing that happens to you, there's a wisdom, and there's a purpose. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes something from you, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests you with something, or you're afflicted with hardship, a lot of times people get lost in the hardship. They get lost in the problem, and they're not able to look at through it and see, what am I supposed to be learning from this? What is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how does Allah want me to respond? When we see everything in dunya as being the end itself, it's kind of like, it's just they become blocks. We can't see through them. We can't see through problems. We can't see through blessings. We can't see through beauty. We can't see through money. We can't see through the gifts. The point is this, that every single thing in dunya, including hardships, including blessings, including gifts, including provision, all of these things are just reflections. All of these things need to be seen through. We can't let them be blocks. You have to be able to see through them, to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala behind them. Because Allah is the one in control. Allah is the one in control over everything that's happening to you. And if a calamity has hit you, don't think for a moment that it's just an accident, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing you. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants something from you. Make sure that you see all of life in that way. You look at everything in that way. When your car isn't starting, think about it. Think about the lesson. When you get a blessing, think about the lesson. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us all of these things to teach us something, to get something from us. So see it in that way. And make sure that we don't get deceived in becoming dependent on the gift instead of the giver. This is huge. And there are a lot of examples of why we do that and how we do that. But there's another side of dunya, and this is the way that we as believers want to be able to use dunya. So we talked a lot about how dunya can be a barrier between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, how the creation can be a barrier between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But there's another way, and this is the way that we seek and we strive for as believers, and that is to make the creation actually a means to get you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So do you see the two? The creation, including humans, including blessings, including money, including everything in this life, can either be a veil, can either be a barrier, or it can be a path. It can be actually a means, a tool, a vehicle to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let me give you an example. people. So people are a good example because people can either be a distraction or they can be a means. What are some, we talked a lot about examples where people can be a distraction. When you love somebody, let's talk about love for a second. When you love somebody, as you should only love Allah, Allah has given you a gift. A lot of times it's our own families, our children, our husbands, our wives, our parents, our brothers, our sisters. Allah's given you a gift, but then you start to become distracted and you start to love that gift more than the giver, more than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or as you should love Allah. So in this case, you've made that gift, it becomes a block. It becomes like a barrier between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Imagine another example. A human being comes and hurts you. Suppose, everybody's, has been wronged in one way or another by another human being. Somebody comes and hurts you, or somebody comes and insults you. Somebody comes and spreads rumors about you, or backbites about you. You can react to this in one of two ways. You can react to it in one of two ways. One way is to become so angry at that person and to become so focused on that person and what they've done that you completely forget Allah, actually, because you're so obsessed and so focused on what they did to you. We talked about attachments as being the first thing you think about in the morning, the last thing you think about before you sleep, what you think about in your salah, what keeps you up at night, what makes you cry, what makes you angry, what makes you most happy, right? Now when someone has hurt you, and there are some people who become so obsessed with this wrong that has happened to them that it's all they can think about. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like, it's like always on their mind. How could they do this to me? It's all they talk about. When they're talking to their friend or they're talking to their mother, that's all they can talk about. They can hardly sleep because of it. That's the first thing they think about in the morning and last thing they think about before they sleep. They start planning how they're going to respond or what, talking to everyone about it. What has happened here? This has actually become kind of what your world revolves around. So now your focus has completely shifted. Now your focus is on this person or what they've done to you or the harm that's happened to you. So in a way, it has actually completely distracted you. There's another way to look for the same incident, right? Somebody hurts you, someone insults you, someone spreads a rumor about whatever, you get hurt by people. And instead of reacting in that way, you can remember the example of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. Now Abu Bakr, similar thing happened to him. Well, much worse, right? Because his daughter, Aisha, was accused of adultery. And this was a rumor that started spreading. And not only is it his daughter, but it's the wife of the Prophet ﷺ and the mother of the believers. And this rumor is being spread. So we have to look at what was his response. He actually found out that one of the people who spread this rumor was a family member of his, a relative of his. So you can imagine what that would be like to find that out. His response, actually, it was not only a family member, it was a family member who he used to support financially. He used to actually give charity to this person. So what he did was, naturally, when he found out this was one of the people, he stopped the financial support. That's all he did. An ayah was revealed about this particular incident in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to him, it's addressing this concept of forgiveness. And at the end of the ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, do you not love that Allah would forgive you? So you see the point here? Now let's just look at this. Here Abu Bakr as-Siddiq is being told to forgive and is being asked, do you not love that Allah would forgive you? So by forgiving this person for what he did, it's a means of what? Getting the forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this small thing is a means to get something that's not small. The forgiveness of Allah is not small, right? The forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is of infinite proportions. And this is a very small thing that we can do in order to get this. But let me ask you this. If you had never been hurt, if you had never been let down, if you had never been insulted, if you had never been stabbed in the back, would you have really had that opportunity? You see how it became a means? The same incident can be either this or it can be this. It can be a means for you to lose focus, for you to completely become distracted, for you to be basically brought down. Or it can be a means of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's forgiveness. You see the two? Two opposite extremes, depending on how you respond. So this is an example of how the dunya and what happens in the dunya and the creation itself can either be a block or can be a means, can be an actual vehicle to bring you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we respond in the right way. If we respond in the right way, everything that happens to us is actually good for us. That's intense. And this is the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ who says that the example of a believer is strange. You know why it's strange? Because everything is good for them. You know, you can't, it's hard to imagine, right? You think, oh, there's some good things and there's some bad things, right? No, but not for a believer. For a believer, everything is good. And that's like, people be like, what? I don't get that, right? No, okay, maybe if I get lots of money and I get lots of power and I get lots of status, that's good. But if I lose all my money and I lose all my status and I lose all my power, that's a bad thing, right? No, not for the believer. Because everything for a believer is good. Everything for a believer is actually a means to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if they respond in the right way. And the hadith says that when something you love, something you like comes to you, you are grateful, so it's good for you. And when something you don't want or you don't like comes to you, you are patient, so it's good for you. Every condition in life can be made good for you. Assalamu alaikum. Can be actually a means to bring you nearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's a statement here of Yahya ibn Mu'adh, who said, "How can I not love this world in which I have been blessed with sustenance that gives me life, when I use this life for worship by means of which I can earn the reward of the garden?" You see how he's looking at this life? He's saying, how can I not love this life? So there's different types of love of life, right? The people usually who love this life love it for its own sake. You know, you love this life because as if this life is it. I love, you know, the hubb dunya for its own sake. I love this life because I love to get things in this life. But the people who really understood, their love for this life is the same way you love a tool. You know, you don't like, when you're building a house, why do you love the hammer? Why do you love the hammer? You don't love the hammer because the hammer has some intrinsic, you don't go home and you're like holding the hammer and in love with the hammer and fall, you know what I'm saying? Like write poetry for the hammer. You love the hammer because you use it for something bigger. So the hammer is just a tool. It's a tool that you use for something bigger. And that's the way we should see this life. Any kind of attachment, any kind of use, or any kind of inclination that we have to dunya is so much as it can be used to get something better. Do you see that? And mata'a, even the word mata'a, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this life, He says, إِنَّمَا الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا لَعِبٌ وَلَهْوٌ, and indeed the life of this world is la'ib, play and amusement. And He describes it in other ways in this ayah, but in other places Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this life as mata', mata'ul hayat ad-dunya, that everything in this life is a mata'. And mata' is, when you really look at the linguistic meaning of this word, or you go and you look at the root of this word, it basically means a resource, that you, something like some resource for worldly pleasure. It's a resource. It's a tool. It's a tool. It's something you use. So this whole life and everything in it is a tool. Just like the hammer that we use to bring us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's the way our relationships should actually be. Our relationships, and that's what we have to do. We look at our relationships. Remember I said everything in the world can either be a barrier or a means. to Allah, a barrier between us and Allah, or a means to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all the creation. So what we have to do is examine everything we have in this life. Is it a barrier between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it a vehicle, is it a means that's bringing us closer to Him? And I'm talking about everything, our time, our money, our health, our youth, our abilities, all the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us, and our relationships, and all of our relationships. Study your life. Take time and sit and reflect about your life and see which things in our life are that barrier and which things are a means, and make changes, because you should have everything in your life be a means. This is serious because, here's an example I want you guys to think about, because we can relate to this. We live in a place where there's earthquakes, right? And you can't really predict an earthquake, but suppose you could. Suppose that someone told you on the news that there was an earthquake coming. Okay? And they told you that if you don't seek shelter, you and everyone you love will be destroyed. What's going to be your response? What's going to be my response? Well, one of two things. Either we believe or we don't believe, right? Maybe someone thinks, oh, this is a hoax, it's not true. But let me ask you this. If you really believed that the earthquake was coming, how would you respond? No, really. If someone really knows, and they don't need to believe, they don't need to be religious, nothing. But if you know that an earthquake is coming, what are you going to do? Well, if you're told you have to seek refuge, you have to seek shelter, otherwise your house is going to be destroyed. Are you not going to seek refuge? You're going to. You're going to. And here's the point I'm making, that nobody, when they know that a storm is about to hit, nobody is going to say, actually, I'm a little busy right now. Actually, I'm a little busy on Facebook, or I'm a little busy with... So the point is that no one's going to be like, I'm busy hanging out, right? Or I'm busy looking at someone's profile on Facebook, or I'm busy, living up my life, living up my youth, right? I'm busy having fun. But that's the way we act, right? We're like, how people have that attitude, I'll be religious later, or I'll wear hijab later. I'm going to live my life, I'm going to live my youth, and then I'm going to do it later. Nobody is going to say, yeah, I know the storm is coming, and I know that it's going to, destroy me and my family, but I'm busy right now having fun. Right? Right? But we say this, and we know for a fact that there is a storm coming. The day of judgment is real, right? Is it? Is it real or not? Is death real? Whether you disbelieve, in God, or you believe in God, or you don't believe in God, you cannot deny death. Right? Nobody can deny that it's coming. So we know that death is coming. We know the day of judgment is coming. And yet we keep playing. We're living our lives just as if it's just a game, as if it's just a joke. And say you have a really important final coming up, and you spend all night just partying and not studying, does it keep the final from happening? It's not like the final's not going to happen just because you're not prepared. You're not going to stop or delay death because you're not ready for it. You're not going to stop or delay the day of judgment because you don't know what to say when you stand in front of Allah. It's still going to happen when it's going to happen. And death will come to you when it's intended to come to you. And no one in this room or anyone alive knows when. So it's almost as if we think that because we're not ready for it, it's going to make it not happen. Or it's going to be delayed. Well, no. Just wait a little bit for me till I'm ready, finish, getting all the partying out of my system, and then now I can start being serious. It doesn't work like that. That the storm is going to hit when the storm is going to hit. That death is going to come when it's going to come. And it's not going to be delayed because you and I aren't ready for it. Or because you and I try to ignore it. Or because you and I are too busy doing other things. We're too busy with our friends and with our distractions and with our relationships. So there were people, subhanAllah, who really did use everything in the creation for just one purpose, and that was to bring them nearer to Allah. It was a tool. This life and everything in it was a tool. So this is an exercise we can do. We really need to take time reflecting on ourselves, reflecting on our lives. What in our lives is actually a barrier, and what in our lives is actually bringing us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu Sufyan was once asked, what is the life of this world which is criticized in the Quran, and which those who are prudent should avoid? And he replied, everything that you do in this world with the intention of making a profit in this world is blameworthy, and everything that you do in this world in order to profit in the next world has nothing to do with this world. So what he's saying again is this concept that whatever you do in this life, if you're just seeking this life, it's a waste. It's a distraction. It's a barrier. But whatever you do in this life, seeking the next life, it will actually benefit you in both this life and the next life. That's the interesting thing. You know how we talk about not getting caught up in dunya, right? But then a lot of people have the argument, well, does that mean that I can't have dunya, or I can't have nice things in dunya, or I can't be involved with dunya at all? And the answer is no, right? Because there's a dua that we're told to say, ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Oh, our Lord, give us good in this life and in the hereafter, and protect us from the hellfire. So obviously, for the believer, there's good in both. But how? And here's the formula. This is the formula. Just keep this in mind. If there's anything you keep in mind, keep this in mind. The one who seeks the hereafter gets both this life and the hereafter. The one who seeks the hereafter gets good in this life and in the hereafter. And when I say good in this life, it's not measured on a material scale, right? Good in this life is contentment in the heart. It's nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala suffices you. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protects you. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides you. Those are the true, good in this life. And other things. But watch this. The one who seeks this life actually loses both this life and the next life. You see that? So it isn't like you seek this life, you get this life alone. The truth is, when you run after this life, it runs away from you. So whoever runs after dunya, dunya runs away from them. So it isn't like you're just getting this life even. When you seek this life, you don't get either. But when you seek the hereafter, you get both. You see that formula? Al-Hasan said, how sweet and good the life of this world is for the mu'min. For without having to make too much effort, he takes his provision from it for the garden. And how awful the life of this world is for the kafir and the munafiq, the hypocrite. For they waste their nights and they take their provision from it for the fire. Something you guys, we should reflect on is, like if you were like shopping, you're at Macy's or whatever, Nordstrom, and you went to Nordstrom Rack where everything's like really, cheaper, right? And you see something, an item which is normally $1,000, and it's on clearance for 1 cent. Something that costs $1,000 and you can get it for 1 cent. Would you think that was a good deal? It's a pretty good deal, right? Now let me tell you this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is offering you and me not something for $1,000, something forever, something really in the scale of infinite. He's offering you and me Jannah forever. For what price? For what price? A couple things, just don't do these haram things, pray a couple times, give zakah, you fast, right? For how long, really? I mean, you spend like how much of your life sleeping, and then you spend how much of, you know what I'm saying? Like, really? And how long do we even live? The longest person, what's going to live for 100 years? That's it. It's less than a penny. and then think of what we're getting in exchange. You guys understand? Sometimes we look at it and we're like, oh, it's too hard. Too hard? Seriously? Like, think about really what you're getting, what you're doing, and what you're getting. Do you guys see the perspective I'm saying here? Think about what you really need to do and what you're getting in exchange. You see that? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala isn't asking really much of us at all. It's nothing compared to what we would get. Now look at the other way around. Look at the other way around. The one who doesn't take this offer. You know, they walk by this clearance, they're like, nah, right? Okay, they don't take this offer. Instead, what are they doing? They're getting punishment forever for what? Do you guys see? How is it really worth it? Like, think about it. Suppose you lived for 100 years, and that entire 100 years was, I don't even know. Think about the life of a person who has no deen. What are they doing? Imagine, just tell me, what was a movie star's life like? What? Drugs, alcohol, parties, right? It's, first of all, full of misery, because, look at these famous people. Like, yes, okay, they have the life, right? They can have whatever they want, and yet they're suffering. Even in this life, they're suffering. And then on top of it, we're gonna to suffer forever? It's just foolish. You're for such a small, what did they get? They got like a few, I don't even know, like a little bit of a high for like a few seconds, few hours, and then they crashed, and then they're addicted, and then they're dying because of these really? Like, what did you really get? And then for that, look what you're gonna get. You're gonna get forever. And the question we have to ask ourselves, is it worth it? So that you can talk to a guy, or you can have a relationship with a guy, and then he's gonna end up dumping you anyways? And then you're going to end up pregnant, and you're going to end up with, sexually transmitted diseases. This is something really we should think about. That these exchange, like what kind of business exchange are we making? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this offer of something perfect, something infinite, for nothing, really. How much does it really take to be a practicing Muslim? A slave to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You do a couple things, you sleep half your life, and then you die and you go to Jannah, inshallah. It's really not anything compared to what you get. And the other way around. Subhanallah, even those people who think that they're running after all these pleasures, they're not even happy in this life. There's so much misery associated with those so-called pleasures in this life, before Jahannam. It actually doesn't make any sense that someone would choose that. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? It doesn't. It's a very, very bad transaction that one has made. Abu Musa related that the Prophet ﷺ said, "Whoever is in love with this life of this world, whoever is in love with his life in this world, damages his life in the next world. And whoever is in love with his life in the next world, damages his life in this world, and you should prefer what lasts forever to what is destined to vanish." See, even here, if you had to be given the choice between this life and the next life, one lasts forever and one is limited. It's a no-brainer, right? If I'm telling you, hey, I can give you $10 billion or I can give you a cent, which one would you rather have? It's not really a question, right? And it's not 10 billion, it's infinite. Even if that were the choice. But honestly, the one who seeks the hereafter, he has both. He has both. Even if there's some things, say you don't eat during Ramadan. There's some things you sacrifice, but the true happiness of this life, you have it. You know what I mean? The true happiness of this life, only that person will actually have it. And the one who runs after the material things of this life, no matter what they do, they will never have the true happiness. Where is the true happiness? What does it come from? ألا بذكر الله تطمئن القلوب. Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala do the hearts find peace and satisfaction. And it is not found anywhere else. So it's like, subhanallah, it's a lose-lose situation. The one who turns away from the remembrance of Allah, the one who prefers this life to the next life, it's a lose-lose situation. They don't have good in this life and they don't have good in the next. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. So I want to stop there, inshallah, and take questions and reflections. Inshallah, we'll finish the rest next time. Yes. Mhm. Mhm. That's very true. Mhm. 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 Exactly. So what she's saying about that, the one um, who disobeys Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they have misery in this life too. And that's because everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to do and everything Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has told us to stay away from is actually for our own good. Just like you said. Because none of these rules are for Allah. It's not for Allah's own good. Is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ghani. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely self-sufficient, is not in need of anything from us. So He doesn't benefit by us lowering our gaze. He doesn't benefit by us wearing hijab or by us praying or by us fasting or by us not having a haram relationship. He doesn't benefit. And it doesn't get harmed if we do have a haram relationship or we do drink or whatever. So it is absolutely true that it's for our own good. That's the reason, you're right, there are observable consequences in this life for not following these instructions. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Any other questions? You guys, subhanallah, you can see it all over, and this is part of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that, like the whole concept of not having relationships outside of marriage. I mean, really, just look at society. Look at the effect of just this one thing. Just this one thing. What are all the effects? Can you guys start listing for me what are the effects of just this one thing of having relationships outside marriage? What has been the societal effect? Okay, so 40% of children being born out of wedlock. Okay. Okay, high rate of divorce. No, but I'm talking about like the fact that people have just the whole concept of premarital relationships or basically having relationships with lots of people outside of marriage. STDs, right? STDs, all types of sexually transmitted disease. Why is that so? Why did that happen? Why is that spread? It's because people have multiple partners. It's very simple. It's not something a religious person needs to tell you. It's because people have multiple partners and they have unprotected, intercourse with multiple partners. Well, if you didn't have multiple partners, you wouldn't have that problem, right? So what else? So the thing about pregnancy, that they're being born out of wedlock. So then now you have single moms. So the woman is now in this situation, and she has a child by herself. She has to somehow figure out how to work and raise this child. And I mean, women are being oppressed by this system. The women themselves are being oppressed by this system, but nobody seems to see that. And somehow the women they're supposed to be acting as if this is fine. They're supposed to accept the fact that a man is going to sleep with them and never give them a commitment. I mean, it's like women have to force a man to marry them. Like you have to beg the man. I mean, it's just it's a very, I mean, it's something very, very oppressive for women themselves. It's just there's so much in our culture about this concept of men not wanting to commit, right? Like, Muslim men, they gotta commit. They don't have a choice. Right? Because, I mean, whether they're that type of person or not, some men, they really are interested in that one, some men, some men are interested in, maybe the emotional connection to one woman and being committed to one woman, and some men aren't. Some men are just interested in playing around, maybe. But it's like they don't have choice, like a Muslim men, and Islam comes and says, whether, whatever your inclination is, sorry, you have to give that woman a commitment. You don't have a choice. That's nice for women. That's something that women really appreciate. And of course it goes both ways. Other questions? Yeah. hmm it's actually, even if you look at so she's talking about how it's like marriage becomes like a burden, or it's kind of like it's like a it's funny, like when you look at the way that society has, even just in the just sort of cultural jokes, just the whole concept of marriage being like the end of a guy's life, or a girl, but typically like guys, it's just like that's when they lose their freedom. That's when they stop being able to have fun. That's when they have to settle down, and it's just like it's almost like, okay, now and then this whole concept of like guys be like having cold feet and being like, oh, here we go, like it's just even if that's not really how every guy feels, but it's sort of a cultural understanding of marriage as being some sort of the end. This is when the guy just has to like die, basically, right? Because his life ends, his bachelor days, and even the bachelor party. That's disgusting. Like culturally, it's just such a disgusting cultural norm. Like, think about it. Let's just analyze it for a second. You have a bachelor party and you bring like whatever strippers and do all this nasty stuff. What are they basically saying here? It's like this is your last chance to like live it up, as if like now you're gonna go and now you're gonna be like in prison. So just like the day before you get put in prison, you want to like party or something. It's just disgusting, but that's the idea, unfortunately. But it's also for women too. I mean, they have a similar tradition, I guess, for their bachelorette parties. Yeah. Hmm. Oh, okay. So you're talking about the people. Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 yeah. Okay. So I think what you're asking is, what about the people who generally, I mean, the bigger question is, what about the people who they appear to be happy and they're not following, the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but they appear to be happy, right? So the thing about, okay, one issue is when we talk about true happiness. That's one issue, is when you talk about true happiness, the true happiness can only be when the heart is fulfilling the purpose for which it was created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the heart for him. So there's no way that you can use that heart for other than that purpose, and it will be fully, it will be satisfied. You see? It was created for that purpose, and it will only find satisfaction once it's used for that purpose for which it was created. The heart was created to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart was created to be close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The heart was created to serve and be full of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Anyone who uses it in a different way will never have that full satisfaction. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ. Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do the hearts find peace and satisfaction. It's only there. Anything else that we see from the outside is an appearance of happiness. It's not the true tranquility and peace of the heart. Because that can only be when that heart is connected to its creator. Allah is the one who made that heart. Allah is the one who made the nature in a certain way, the fitrah in a certain way. But, okay, so then why then, the second part is then why does it seem to appear, oh, they don't seem to have problems, or some people they just seem to be like, yeah. One way that I've had it explained to me, and it made a lot of sense, is there's kind of like this this range. You have two extremes, which can kind of go along with the nafs al-mutma'inna and nafs al-ammara. We talked at the very beginning of this book about different types of nufus, different types of souls. You have the nafs al-ammara. Nafs al-ammara is the soul it's the very evil, the soul that calls just towards anything bad. It doesn't want anything that would be pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like everything the opposite. That's one extreme. And then on the opposite side is nafs al-mutma'inna. That's the soul that's in complete peace and satisfaction with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It calls to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves. But most people, or most believers, are right in the middle. Or most Muslims are in the middle, which is nafs al-lawama. You know, they're still in that struggle kind of between the two. But when you look at these people over here, nafs al-ammara, the one who's so far from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what happens is that the heart can actually become dead. And so it doesn't actually feel anything anymore. It doesn't feel the pain of the distance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Any apparent happiness they have is just the physical sort of animalistic type, like an animal can seem happy, you see? But it's not, it's no longer that they feel that pain, because if you kill the heart, if the heart is completely dead, you doesn't feel anymore the pain of being away from Allah. And whatever happiness that appears to be there is just a superficial, external type of physical happiness. And then you have the nafs al-mutma'inna, you know, on the other side. But the ones who are in the middle are most of us. The ones who the heart is maybe sick, but it still has some life in it. So it does feel the pain. You see? Because it's still sort of alive. So when it's distant from Allah, or it makes a mistake, or it does still feel that pain. So that's the one in the middle who kind of goes still up and down. Sometimes it's happy, sometimes it's sad, sometimes it's in pain, sometimes it's you know, at peace. You see what I mean? That's why, because the heart it's basically the difference between a heart that's dead and doesn't feel anything, and a heart that's still alive but may have some sickness in it. And then there's the heart that's completely at peace. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Mm. Yeah. So one thing is that, uh, yeah, I get what you're saying. I see what you're saying. And one thing to keep in mind is that the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes any deeds that are done, like for example, in one part in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, that he talks about the people who are kuffar, they have disbelieved. أَعْمَالُهُمْ, that their deeds are, and he describes it in two different ways in different parts of the Quran. But one of the ways he describes the deeds of the one who has not believed, or the one who has rejected, the kuffar, is like ashes on a windy day. It's like ashes on a windy day. You're doing something, but it ends up becoming worthless, and then it actually gets just taken by the wind. And another description is like the one who, when you see a mirage in the desert, and and then the disbeliever, the person, thinks that it's water, but when he comes to it, finds that there's nothing there. So these very powerful and like analogies Allah gives, that when you're doing those things, you might think that it's good, or that there's some benefit to it, but ultimately in the hereafter, it's just like that mirage. Assalamu alaikum. We see the same thing, alaikum salam. We see the same thing even with someone who's praying or giving charity, or even a shaheed who didn't do it for the sake of Allah, right? I'm glad you bring that up. You know why? Because that's actually something that a lot of us fall into. When you're faced with a problem and you start becoming consumed with the problem, right? That's a really tricky thing that we need to be careful about. When you have a problem, we have to be careful not to be focusing on the problem itself. Because the more you focus on a problem, the more you get weighed down, and you're never going to solve it just by focusing on it. The reason we do that is because we're relying on our own self, our own means to solve the problem. What we're really supposed to do when you're faced with a problem is you're supposed to turn to the one who can solve the problem, because you can't solve the problem. This is the key here, that we understand that I'm not the one who can figure this out, solve this, work this out, rectify this, but rather I turn to the one who can. So that's why we need to really disengage and refocus from focusing on the problem itself to focusing on the one who can solve it. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم إنه غفور رحيم. سبحانك الله وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر.